I don't prioritize the business results matter more than everything else in life, because they don't. It's just not true. Like, it's this myth that wealthy people foist onto society in order to get everyone else to make them more money. Why do we do it?
People say, I am the best boss. They go, God, we've never worked in a place like this before. And you get the best out of us. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Welcome back to Good Boss, Bad Boss. This podcast is created in partnership with Share Your Genius, an awesome award-winning podcast production agency. I'm Joey, your host, and today I'm having a major fangirl moment because our guest is the one and only Rand Fishkin, co-founder and CEO of SparkToro, previously founder and CEO of Moz. Our first encounter was actually back in 2016 when I was still working at Mention and had invited him to join a video series called Real Smart Marketing. The fact that he said yes to that just tells you what a kind person he is. Back then, he was already a giant in marketing, and he is most well known and loved for his generosity and transparency. You may know him from his 5-minute whiteboards or his book, Lost and Founder, probably just the most refreshing business book I've ever read because it's a painfully honest account of his ups and downs of building his company over almost 2 decades. He doesn't shy away from any sensitive topics like his biggest mistakes, what he really thinks about VCs and the perverse incentives they bring, and his experience with depression. His radical transparency is such a consistent personal trait that shines through in the way he builds his companies and the way he shows up as a boss. And that's really what I want to get into today. And that's really what I hope to see more of in leadership or in the world. As you can tell, I'm a big fan, and I think you'll be too after this episode. Let's dive right in. Today, I'm super excited to have Rand Fishkin with me on Good Boss, Bad Boss. Welcome, Rand, to the show. So obviously, you are a giant in the marketing world. Everybody in content, SEO, marketing in general knows who you are. But since we are not doing technically a marketing podcast, and for people who don't know you, namely my parents, can you introduce yourself, your career journey, including perhaps where you've worked and your progression from an individual contributor to being a boss?
I started my career, at least in the marketing world, as a web designer, contracting for my mom, Jillian, who was running a small business marketing agency in the Seattle area, helping people with things like letterhead and logo and yellow page ads, right back when that was most of marketing. And as the web grew in the late 90s, I was building websites for some of her clients and making a little bit of money on the side while I was going to high school and then college. And I really enjoyed the web. I actually dropped out of college and started working as a web designer full time. That turned out to be a kind of a terrible decision. I was not a good web designer. I'm still not. The company was not doing well. I started a blog about SEO called SEO Moz. Eventually, through many twists and turns, we stopped doing web design consulting, started doing SEO consulting, and then eventually built some of our own software. And as the software was taking off, I went from an individual contributor who was writing the blog posts and doing a lot of the consulting work to being the CEO. Initially, I was sort of managing a team of SEO consultants, small team, like 4 people. And then when we raised venture capital in 2007, the VCs asked me to be CEO formally. And so that's when I took the role. Until we raised venture, I never made more than $30,000 in a year, which was not a great salary even at that time. We're talking about a real rinky-dink little operation. There's no training. It's just, hey, you're in charge now to lead this company. By the way, here's $1.1 million. Let's see if you can turn that into $100 million. Go.
It's very interesting and unusual that you co-founded basically your first company with your mom, Jillian. And together you grew it into this big multi-million dollar, millions in revenue. What was it like in the early days? Was your mom your manager for a while? How did that feel and look like?
Technically, my mom, Jillian, was the president of the company that turned into SEO Moz. So I became CEO and she was president and co-founder. I would say in the early days, it was very much like a partnership, which no offense to my mom, but I think it probably shouldn't have been. She probably should have run it more like the CEO, especially in the early days. She knew what she was doing. She'd been running that company for 20 years, a solo single person operation. She had a lot of history and experience. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing. She treated my input as though we were partners and co-founders, which is incredibly sweet and kind. And I'm sure, that was something that she did as a mom more so than as a business partner. But yeah, it was definitely tough at the time. It's surprising to me is a lot of founders and startups and projects of all kinds with married partners seems to work pretty well.
I was just going to say, I guess at least you choose your partner, family you don't choose.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm a huge advocate of family of choice. I love that.
You mentioned SEO Moz and then, raising venture capital and then being asked to be CEO. What's the biggest team that you've ever managed, whether in Moz or current company SparkToro?
I believe when I stepped down as CEO, Moz was a little over 150 people, maybe 160, 170, something like that. It grew after I stepped down and promoted my chief operating officer to the role. I was at the company when we were up over 200 people. Moz bought another company up in Canada called Stat Analytics that had its own team of maybe 35 or 40. And so the company got significantly bigger. But in comparison, right, SparkToro is only 3 people. It's just myself, Casey, and Amanda, one of my current companies. That experience is great. The other company I run, Snack Bar Studio, which is developing a video game, that company is 4 people right now, and we're looking for our 5th, an artist.
And how do you feel about running these smaller companies?
I think, Joey, this is one of the things that you don't learn until you have the experience. I thought what I wanted was to run a big company, hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, IPO, be a public company, all that kind of stuff. And then the more time I spent around people who had accomplished that, who had built big companies and gone public and were CEOs of those, the less excited I got about it. In fact, I would say I felt strongly biased against it by the end of my tenure as CEO at Moz. And I came to believe, too, that Moz would be a better company and product if we were a smaller team, just generally, and had less layers of management and less meetings and more of a remote first culture, all of the things that now I get to live. It is fantastic. I need to be more grateful every day for how fantastic it is, because it's wonderful.
The path you walked is the only path that could have led you to where you are today, I suppose.
See, I don't want to believe that. I don't know if it's true, but what I want to believe, Joey, is that if I had been more open to learning from other people first, going to work at a few other companies. I wrote about this in Lost and Founder. I really, really wish I had worked at 2 or 3 startups before I started my own.
You did say that starting a company, especially a venture-backed one, you don't get to do what you love. You are just always chasing the next thing.
I think our investors in Moz were some of the best folks in that field. My concern is with the structure of the asset class and what it demands. The thing that drove Moz to make a lot of the mistakes that it made, and obviously I am responsible primarily for those mistakes, including appointing my successor, the CEO, who I think also made some mistakes about what the business should do. And I chalk that up to we could never be satisfied making customers happy, delighting them, building better products for them. We had to always be thinking about, is this market too small? And do we need to expand and grow? And there were tons of discussions at board meetings from probably 2012 to 2015, 16 about how the SEO market was just too small to build the kind of software company that we needed to build to make the return that our investors were expecting and to make the stock options of our employees worthwhile. And I think this is true of public companies as well. I think Google was a great company. Really, it was. I think Twitter was an exciting company before it went public. And I think that many, many businesses in technology, especially in software, are poorly served, and so are their customers, their employees and team, the managers at those companies, even the executives who made the decision to do those things. I think all of them are poorly served by the incentives of growth at all costs forever.
They are serving the shareholder and not the customers or the employees.
My biggest frustration with capitalism is when it gets big and the later stages of it, right, where everyone is serving a small number of very wealthy people and their interests, which is generally what the public markets are about, as opposed to small scale capitalism, which I think is awesome, right? It's the freedom to, hey, you want to start a podcast about being a better boss, and then you want to monetize it and build a newsletter around it and help people become better at their jobs. And like, you're the boss of it. You decide how big it gets, how small it gets, how many hours to work, how little. That's so fantastic. I love, love, love that free market economies enable that freedom to put your labor where you want and where it's wanted. I love building small companies.
Awesome. The biggest reason I wanted to speak to you was also that you are known for being radically transparent, how you built your company, being very generous with your marketing knowledge, but also like just the ups and downs in the startup world and the VC world, which is very opaque at times. Have you always been this way, or something happened and you turned to be more transparent?
Yeah. So when I was a kid growing up and then all the way into the early days of Moz, my parents kept a lot of things from each other. They're still married. Their relationship has had its ups and downs probably, but they still live together, right? But there was always, don't tell your dad that we went here. Don't tell your mom that we stopped here, that kind of stuff. Even as a little kid. And it was dumb stuff. Like my mom wanted to buy some groceries from the grocery store that didn't have them on sale. And my dad was religiously fanatical about buying things on sale because he had grown up, both my parents actually had grown up without a ton of money and we didn't have a lot. Yeah, we weren't struggling by any means, but my dad was just very, very obsessed with saving money. And so there were all these things that were just secrets and you're not supposed to talk about it. And I hated it. There was always this tension and that I just remember being a kid, like half of my days spent with a pit in my stomach that like I would say the wrong thing. My dad would find out about this. My mom would find out about that, whatever. It sucked. And then as a young adult too, right? We were going deeply, deeply into debt at the company that eventually became SEO Moz and then Moz. And this little, consulting firm owed like $120,000 to banks and credit cards and all this kind of stuff. And then we stopped being able to make the minimum payments, which I really wasn't paying attention to. Like my mom was, president. She was handling all the finances, paying all the bills, whatever. All I knew was things weren't going well. And then debt collectors started showing up at my door and scary letters in the mail and showing up at my girlfriend's door. I was living with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Geraldine. They found her apartment and then were coming there. And it was really sketchy sort of experience. And then hiding that from my dad and trying to hide it from the rest of the world. I hated it. I hated it so much. And I think that is the root of why for the last 20-ish years, I've taken the complete opposite direction, which is, hey, you know what? Here's all my dirty laundry. I'd rather be judged for that than try and worry about someone finding it.
Yeah.
I love having nothing to hide. It makes getting through the day so easy. And I think that with the start of Moz, in a way, I almost benefited from that belief, especially the blog, which is what attracted a lot of our clients and the speaking at events and research projects we did, et cetera, tools, was take all of this information that Google was keeping secret and make it transparent and open so that people could understand how search engines worked and how to do things. And that, I think that really built Moz and built my career. It's how people know me and know the companies that I work at. It's like, oh, that guy makes first SEO knowledge and then marketing knowledge more accessible. I can understand how this stuff works because Rand explains it.
So your personal trait value became your company's or your brand's value. And it just resonates perfectly. Yeah. Like, was it easy for you to be that transparent? Have you ever had pushback within like your exec team or other people within the company saying like, hey, maybe don't share that so transparently?
Yes, I think plenty of times other people have pushed back on various aspects. I think I shared news about, for example, like Geraldine's brain tumor very early and before she was ready to talk about it.
Yeah, that was a very memorable chapter in your book about vulnerability and how you decided to share the news with the whole company.
Yeah.
And I thought that was incredible.
Yeah, it was a really heartwarming and wonderful thing, but also I definitely should have waited and talked to Geraldine before sharing that. Thankfully, she's very forgiving and understanding of my bias to transparency. Similarly, when I wrote Lost and Founder, the board of directors and the CEO I had appointed were very worried. I think they feared that the book was going to make them and or the company look bad. And they wanted me to talk to Penguin Random House, who's the publisher for Lost and Founder, and my editor there about like, hey, they need a review copy before it goes to press. The folks at Penguin were like, no. When the chief of staff for the White House writes a book, we don't share it with the president either. So no, you don't get it. It was a very challenging time, right? There was a lot of stress and strife. And I think this is part of my bias, right? Is that I strongly believe in not creating those times of stress and uncertainty and just sharing everything publicly. I fought relentlessly with the executive team at Moz about sharing our finances when things were going poorly in 2015-16. And then, of course, the company did layoffs in 2016 at I think August or September of that year. I just hated those months of waiting and not being able to talk about things. And, oh, why aren't we sharing financials anymore? I don't know. I guess you'll have to talk to Sarah about that. I hate that. I think it's dumb. I think it's a bad idea. I think it creates more stress and tension. I don't think it actually saves anyone anything.
I think the reason why I'm drawn to your style is also because personally I'm more biased towards transparency as well. I actually had a docuseries of my onboarding. First 3 months of when I joined 360 Learning, my company now. And we were showing really like things that I did wrong and disagreements with my boss. And it's part of like a brand marketing campaign. And during a company all hands, there was some like feedback from the team saying, hey, are we sure we want to share all of these things that don't make us look great? And they're like, it's making us look bad. We're showing like our problems. We're showing that we're doing, I don't know, salary freezes during COVID. And luckily, my CEO really agrees with the transparency and say like, no, I believe in this project. And then I also said like, I think the fact that we're showing the realness of things make us more authentic as a brand rather than like another PR stunt where you just show the nice stuff. Nobody wants to see like a glossy version of your not real situations. I kind of kept that transparency. And when I became manager, I was very transparent with my team most of the time. So when I don't agree with some decisions that maybe the bosses make or things that I don't necessarily want to do, I would transparently share with the team.
So one of the things we never did was share employee salaries. And that is one of those things where, a lot of folks outside the company said, hey, to be radically transparent, that means sharing all the stuff, including salaries. And my bias was I felt that it should be every person's choice whether they want to share how much they make, right? There's family dynamics around that and friendship dynamics and personal stuff. And so I understand and I like the transparency in terms of a forcing function for fairness. We know that everyone's making a fair amount. And if you're working at the same job, for example, there's lots of companies still where women in the same role will make less than men in the same role, that kind of stuff. And I think transparency can help in those cases, but external transparency around it can also be harmful. Like, hey, Joey, I know that you make XYZ, so can you help me out with this or that? And it's like, oh, geez, I wish my company didn't tell everyone how much I made on the internet. That's my business, not theirs.
So you recently published a blog post about your last day at Moz, something that you were not able to share because of an NDA or other reasons. And you were quite open about the impact your last day had on your self-worth, identity, saying that it was one of the worst days of your career. Can you talk a little bit about the emotional challenges you faced during that period and how it changed maybe your take and how you're running your company now?
For 17 years, I worked at this one company, basically my whole adult life up to that time period from 2001 to 2018. And that became a part of who I was and how I thought about myself and even to the world today, right? A lot of times when people introduce me on a podcast, they'll say the CEO of SparkToro, previously the CEO of Moz, the founder of Moz. So there's just this big, deep connection to that long running company. It's a huge challenge to overcome to try and separate your personal identity from your professional identity and the company that you're at. What did I spend those first 2 decades of my career doing? Why did I do it? And then, I'd written this blog post called My Last Day at Moz, My First Day at SparkToro. I published that late at night, the night after I left the company. And when I woke up in the morning and for the next 2 weeks, there's just innumerable thousands of messages across LinkedIn and Twitter and in the comments of the post itself. And then just so many emails that it took me weeks to get through and just answer them all in my new inbox, right? In my SparkToro inbox. And those messages were 99.9% positive. Just people saying incredibly nice, supportive things, thanking me for the ways that I'd helped them in their career, telling me their stories, the stories of, hey, I was working, doing manual labor at this job and I was kind of going nowhere, but I found Moz and I learned SEO and then I got a job in digital marketing. I got hired by this agency and now I'm running a team there and I just went to my first conference and all this kind of stuff. So many people just saying that our work had made their lives, their careers better. And so that is when the script flipped for me, right? It went from, gosh, here was this thing that I just feel terrible about to, you know what? I can feel bad about the decisions I made. I can make new and better decisions in the future with other companies. But this company, this project, especially through the learning and the transparency aspects, helped so many people. I don't think I can feel guilty and terrible about that. I need to have some gratitude. Yeah, recognize like how important that contribution is and valuable and not beat myself up.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love is that when you read the blog post of your last day at Moz, it was so transparent and most founders would never publish a post like that. They would be so worried about what people would think. Oh my God, I'm showing weakness. Do people think I'm a failure? Like all those questions that people would ask before they would even consider publishing anything remotely close to that level of transparency. And your courage is rewarded. People can feel it.
I recently wrote a blog post about the end of the Moz journey for me. You know, I stepped off the board in 2020 and about a little more than 18 months later, the company was sold to a private equity company, I think a Canadian company. Not a great sale price. I think they probably got their money back. Maybe they made a tiny bit, but not very much. And of course, most of the stock options did not turn into big wins for anybody. That post, I think, brought a similar level of like lots of people who had been interested for years to know what was the end of that journey like? How did that wrap up?
I think it was in this blog post where you mentioned your relationship with Sarah, the ex-CEO of Moz, and you called her your ex-best friend. That really stuck with me. I don't know if you want to quickly just touch on that.
I try to see things a lot from other people's perspective. And I think from her perspective, I suspect what happened is that she was made CEO. She always wanted to be in that role. That was part of her ambition. And I think, you know, she was a phenomenal COO, Chief Operating Officer, and a great friend to me and to Geraldine for a decade plus. And obviously we had a lot of success building Moz from kind of this rinky dink doing a few $1,000s a month in software revenue up to 30, 35, 40 million when I stepped down as CEO. And the next few years, she sort of felt like, hey, I've been left in this position of the company is at a challenging transition point where there's this directive from the board. And I think she believed as well that the company should go broader than SEO and try to be all of these different things to lots of different marketing functions. And as I sort of came around to the idea that maybe that wasn't great, I think that created a lot of tension between us and on the board. And she felt unsupported. Like, hey, the former founder and my best friend kind of stepped down, put me in this position. Now I'm supposed to continue the growth curve that we've had and things are getting more challenging. He's not being supportive of my decisions. And I think that put a lot of tension on the friendship. And then the layoffs, I think she felt like because I had agitated for a long time to be more transparent and to do the layoffs earlier and not to hire at all in the years prior and to get back to being a profitable company. We didn't have the same shared strategic objectives. And I think that tension bled over into the friendship as well and took us to a breaking point. You know, it was painful and ugly. I think neither of us were as kind to the other as we could or should have been.
Do you still think it's a good idea to work for or with your friend? Can you be friends with your boss?
I 100% believe this. I will never stop doing that. I don't want to work with people I'm not friends with. I'm not interested. The way I think about it is someone broke your heart, someone acted in a way that you wish they didn't, someone didn't reciprocate your feelings for them. That does not mean that you cannot have good relationships. Go do it again. It's going to be fine, right? You will find someone. Geraldine likes to say, there's an ass for every seat. The reality is like Casey and I are good friends. I'm friends with his whole family. Like I love his kids and his wife. And we went to see the Barbie movie all together this summer. It was so much fun. Geraldine and I are super good friends with Amanda, who's our VP of marketing. And we're friends with the folks who are in the video game company as well. And my hope is that continues forever because that is building just an awesome life.
That's how I feel too, but I've been told like, no, like you have to remember that, you know, you're not friends. Even if you're outside, you're friends outside. When you're working, you're not friends. I'm like, oh.
No, because here's the thing. In an environment, in a venture style environment or a public company style environment, making more money matters more than anything else. That's kind of the only thing that matters. But in a small business, in a business you build or you design, you get to choose what the priorities are. And my priorities are, I don't care if in a few years I find like, well, maybe Casey isn't the best programmer for this and and maybe I should think about trying to replace him or something like, no, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. I care more about the friendship. I care more about keeping that together. If Casey comes to me and he says, hey, I need to get out of the business and I need to, fine, great, I'll do that too. But I don't prioritize the business results matter more than everything else in life because they don't. It's just not true. Like it's this myth that wealthy people foist onto society in order to get everyone else to make them more money. Why do we do it? If you are making enough to cover all your needs and sort of get to a comfortable level of happiness, yes, I also would like to make more money. I fully admit it. Growth is really nice. I love making more money. I love doing things with money. So yes, I have that drive too, but I'm not willing to like, oh no, Amanda, the last 6 months you've been in a funk or whatever and performance hasn't been great. So what? She'll turn it around. We'll get there. If she wants to go, she'll leave. We're going to be friends for life. I think I sent Amanda an email when she joined SparkToro. And I said, the only thing that you can't do in this job is you cannot burn yourself out, get angry and frustrated, feel resentment, feel like you're not being listened to or heard, and not tell me. You have to tell me. You have to tell me if things aren't feeling good because that's the thing that I focus on preserving forever is the relationships.
Oh man, wonder if I'm having like an existential crisis of what kind of companies I need to work for. I care about the personal relationships before everything else when I hire someone. And then I was told that, well, that's a little bit naive because sometimes you have to make calls that would make you have to sacrifice your personal relationships when they're not performing, when they're not aligned with the company's strategy. And so you can only do what you're describing if the macro environment is not just growth at all cost.
Joey, there are cases, I'm sure someone listening is going, oh, this is fantasy land you're living in, right? In a real business, people sometimes don't perform. That is okay too. You can preserve a friendship where someone didn't work out professionally. But you have to, as long as you prioritize the personal relationship. So if the conversation is, hey, Amanda, I don't think things are going awesome with SparkToro. Why don't we say this? Why don't you focus on this? If you can get here in 6 months, great. And if you can't, you know what? Let's not work together. Like, let's have you go find a new job, whatever severance is fair. But we're still going to go to Disneyland in November together. You don't have to be working together to be friends, but you also don't have to act in an unfriendly, unsupportive way when you are making hard decisions about a business.
We need more bosses like you, Rand. I was just going to transition to the hustle culture versus chill work, which I think is a nice transition. And you have written a blog post about chill work, which is what you advocate and you practice with SparkToro, your company now. So can you elaborate what made you come up with this idea of chill work? What is it and why?
I'm pretty sure Amanda coined the term chill work after she started at SparkToro. She picked up on this vibe of, hey, you and Casey have different priorities about how you run this company and what you think is important. So Casey, for example, he's sort of primary caretaker for his two girls because his wife, Lindsay, has a demanding job outside the home. Casey works from home, as do I, right? And so he does the laundry, he does the cleanup, he picks up the girls from school, he makes sure they drop off and all that kind of stuff. And as a result, there's lots of hours during the day where he's not fully available. And then sometimes he's coding late at night or sometimes he's tired. And we also have this belief, I think generated from the years at Moz, that we don't establish launch dates. We have rough times like, hey, we have the new version of SparkToro that's coming out in hopefully the end of this year. If it slips to January because whatever life got in the way, no problem, not a big deal. We also designed the software to not rely on any real-time calls to services we don't own and control, which was one of the big challenges at Moz, right? So Moz had this reliance on being able to pull data from Google search results or Google Analytics or other connections to APIs. And if one of those services had a problem, then our service had a problem. And, our engineers were on call and you get up in the middle of the night because an alarm went off and you got to go to your computer and all that kind of stuff. So we decided we were going to build a product that had no real-time calls. Nothing like that, right? So that there would never be a need for those alarms. So it's very design intentional the heart of the design of the company and the way we serve customers is all this very chill structure. Not every business can do it. Or you're running a coffee shop. You can't just say, well, we're open from 9 to 5. And then you're like, today 9:30. Sometimes, but if you do that a lot, it's a problem. We have the same policy with, we don't do demos. So people who call us who want a sales demo, like, hey, can you walk me through the product? We reply with, sorry, we have these videos, but because we're just a tiny team, we can't do it. And yeah, customer support is really, really fast because one of the three of us is almost always able to answer within an hour or two, sometimes less. But there's so few support requests because for the first couple of years that the product ran, every support request that was something we could fix inside the product or address, Casey just put it in there. So he was like, oh, Joey, you wrote in about this, but I fixed it not just for you, but anybody else, whoever writes in. If a few people are confused about, hey, where is the billing section of my account? You know what? From now on, we're going to change the label on the drop down to billing because that's what people apparently call it. And so, now they can find us.
That's the upside of having the CTO be the support as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, this is one of the things that I wish if I go back in time at Moz, I would absolutely do that too. But the big thing here is just this design around chill work, around an environment where we don't have to be on call. We only need to put in a relatively small number of hours in a week. Don't get me wrong. This is a relatively busy week for me. I'm probably going to work 50 hours between the two companies that I run. But in a lot of weeks, I can put in 20 and it's okay. We were like in Italy in April and things went great. SparkToro was growing and Snackbar was going well.
Is that because you're the boss or also for Casey and Amanda? They can also put in 20 hours a week.
So Amanda has been on parental leave since August. She and I had a conversation in July and I was like, I'm a little nervous about picking up the slack from stuff that you do, especially like newsletter, webinar, prepping for Spark Together, our conference, our event, and all this kind of stuff. And so we decided, hey, you know what? Let's hire an interim VP marketing, like a consultant to do like 10, 20 hours a week with us to kind of fill in. And so Brendan Hufford, who's been a SparkToro user and fan and also a great marketing consultant, we brought him on to sort of fill Amanda's role. And now Amanda's back like 2 days a week. It works fine. It's a very, very chill environment and it's structured and built that way. It's intentionally designed that way. This is not just because we want to work less and we don't care that much about making money. It is also because my belief is that careful design and thoughtful strategy is a better way to have a more successful business than under-designing something and under-optimizing it and thus needing to put in lots of stressful, long, hard hours, which I think takes away not only from your sort of life happiness, but also your ability to make good decisions. When I look back at that period, 2013-14 period, where I had depression at Moz and then eventually stepped down as CEO, I think my inability to make good decisions was directly connected to being overworked, overstressed, overpressured, not from my investors necessarily, but from the type of business that we were trying to build. And if I had been well-rested and happy and had a business that was sort of running smoothly according to what it needed to do, I believe I would have made way better decisions that could have led Moz to venture scale growth. It's paradoxical, right? It's almost ironic in the same things that VC culture, Silicon Valley business culture demands of you are the same things that hold you back from doing them well because you make poor decisions in those types of environments.
I admire your courage in sharing the fact that you experienced depression. And I think you shared also that when you shared it with other people, we realized how common it was within founders in the startup world and the VC-backed companies.
The shitty thing that I discovered was that almost no one felt comfortable talking about it because they thought their investors or board or executive team would stop trusting them or would think less of them.
I mean, there's a lot of stigma too, I think, back then. Now I think it's changing, but
it is considerably better, I think, 10, 11 years on. But even still, I think there's some bias to if a board of directors is looking for a new CEO and they see someone and they say, oh, well, that person has a history of mental health problems. They're probably not going to recruit them and hire them. And I think for a lot of venture-backed CEOs who go from not just the companies they found, but to other CEO roles or C-level roles, never mind CEO, that is a real consideration.
When in reality, it's the opposite, because now through your experience, then you're like, I need to be very intentional about how I'm building my product, my company. So then you don't have to hustle and burn out for it to not succeed in the end. So I guess are we valuing the right things? It's kind of the theme of this whole startup VC world.
There's a ton of pressure to do strange things for short-term gain, which I really, really don't believe in and think is another poison in the system of how these types of companies run. I'll give an example. I think that Moz was very often trying to hit certain numbers, monthly numbers or quarterly numbers, so that it would both look good to its existing investors, who could then mark up the value of the company to their LPs so that they could raise their next round for their next fund, and also so that if we wanted to fundraise or when we wanted to fundraise for our next round, we would look good to our future potential investors. And that made us do, lots of sort of one-off growth hacky things. I would argue that those were almost always terrible investments versus, hey, let's focus on what is the core reason people leave the service and go to a competitor, or what's the thing that they most want from the product that they are not getting now, or what's the thing that breaks for them most often. Let's go fix those things, focus on those things. Yeah, I see a ton of companies right now who are basically like, how do we get AI in our product so that our investors will back us? Oh my God, you're killing me. Go solve your customers' problems, not your potential future investors' desires.
What I love from your story is also how I felt like you turn something painful and then you build it into something that works for you. Like in the beginning, you said you need to be transparent in your work and your life. And then you build a product that's all about transparency, making SEO more transparent. And then you lead with that. And then you experienced the hustle culture, the burnout, the depression. And then it led you to build a product that can operate on its own without a lot of babying. You can work in a chill way. So yeah, I think it's great how you turn these more painful things into beautiful projects.
What's the point of pain if it can't save you future pain?
Exactly. But not a lot of people manage to do that. So I think you should feel good about yourself.
My hope is that other folks who listen to this episode can hear those stories and think to themselves, wait a minute, I had this pain. I wonder if I can make it less painful for myself and others in the future. I mean, obviously we're talking about in a small business capacity, but that's a way to have a great purpose in life. And I'm very, very grateful to the thousands of generations of humans that came before me and figured out which berries are poisonous and which ones aren't. I'm sure that was not a fun process.
Yeah, we all need to learn from each other, and that's humanity. And yeah. So are you ready for the rapid fire questions? Okay, first one. Are good bosses born or made?
Both. I think there's absolutely characteristics that you have a higher proclivity to when you're born. Like you can feel babies. Some babies are more empathetic. They're like, oh, I probably shouldn't cry right now because I can see that people around me are busy. And some babies are me. And yeah, I don't think there's any skill set or muscle that you can't work and improve as a human being too.
If given the choice, would you prefer to be a manager or an individual contributor?
I mostly hate managing and love individual contributing. Even as a CEO right now, I basically exclusively hire and work with people who are their own managers, their own toughest bosses, and I love that.
Awesome. What's one myth about being a boss that you want to debunk?
I think that the idea, especially in small and medium companies, that your primary job is management is a myth. In fact, I think that if you are doing it right, you should be doing very, very little managing and mostly IC work, and that the people who report to you should feel more like co-contributors to your project rather than underlings. That is, I think, a myth. I wish this was a myth, and I think it could be in more companies, but I don't think that managers should have any reason to make more than individual contributors. I think if you're a high-level individual contributor and a mid-level manager, the high-level IC should be making more money and get more status because the contribution to the company's success is what matters.
If you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of management advice, what would it be?
Hire fewer people, for sure. If I could go back, I would say all of the management things that are connected to perceived status are wrong, and you shouldn't invest in those. And that includes having a bigger team, having a more important title, having managers of managers of managers, and lots of structural layers. that's more status. Unfortunately, people invest in those status things, like how many people report to me, how big is my company. I think this is a big reason that a lot of managers want to return to office is they want to look around a room and feel powerful. See that? See all those people? They're mine. They work for me. If that's motivating you, you got some other problems. You got to go to therapy, friend.
Okay, do you have a book or resource that had significant impact on your management or leadership approach?
Ooh. On the values thing, Good to Great and Built to Last, both from Jim Collins, had a quite profound impact on me in terms of establishing values and making sure that people really believed in them and came to Moz with some of those already. And then same at SparkToro, and the value of having them and writing them down and living up to them.
Great. Wow, my mind is blown by how generous Rand was with sharing his stories. He's even more transparent than he is on social media, which I find incredible. And I just loved how he turned all his past pain into something that's so positive and beautiful and healthy for him, that he found a way to lead that works for him. If you found the podcast valuable and interesting, please share it with someone who might enjoy it. Share, leave a comment, review. That support means the world to me. And if you have any stories or feedback that you want to share with me, leave me a voice memo on SpeakPipe. The link is in the description. That's it for me for today. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time. Bye.